So welcome everybody. This is another of our weekly classes. We finished last session with basically a second run through highlights of the workshop slides. And some time ago, I think Nat had asked for examples from people. So this is Galina, who's in Novosibirsk. I've done workshops over there with her. We haven't talked about the war because it's dangerous for her to communicate about this, but I'm sure that she hates this thing. And the irony is that she was such an enthusiastic adopter of this. She built a board game for 4D, which I left at JPL, and she built the assessment tool and she hosted the website. So about 2 years ago, when I was over there, I decided to make her kind of the world headquarters for 4D. And she also agreed to provide the tools in English, just like I did, for the same pricing that I had, and to host the website. And so I was glad to get rid of it for two reasons. One is the code was incredibly complex with 12 years of unlimited requirements flowing into it. Second, when the biggest problem was when people had a difficulty, they'd call me up to fix it. I don't write C++ code, and even if I did, to go into somebody else's code that evolved over 12 years. So that was all rolling along. Then Ukraine happened. And by the way, our first trip in 2020 was going to be to live Ukraine. I had done everything but bought the tickets. We're going to go to Istanbul, either from Chicago through Turkish Air or United to Frankfurt or Munich and then on, and go to live Ukraine and do workshops there. So, of course, COVID ended all that. So what happened was the last foreign trip we took in 2019, it was the 8th time we were overseas in that year. It was probably the heaviest travel year we ever had. Let's see, we went to Antarctica, we went to South America, went to China twice, Japan twice, Germany twice, France, Portugal in 1 year. So anyway, Gerald, who's the 4D provider and was in Berlin, he's now moved to Dubai. He hosted a workshop for my 75th birthday in Berlin, and a lot of people came from all over the world for it. We had a big birthday party at his apartment with a traditional German meal, which is one of Junko, and I like it. He and his wife are both vegetarians, but we had Gonza, the duck leg. And Galina came from Novosibirsk. And so Gerald had an idea that we'd write a book together. And I think most people who've never done it underestimate the amount of effort it takes to write a book. It's a ton of work. And Nico, you surely know. And so anyway, he had an event at a club he belonged to in Berlin that we all went to and exchanged ideas about how to do a book. And when we got back to the US, people were supposed to send the materials in to me because it would be in English, and I'm the only native English speaker of the group. And we've been through the Chinese contributions so far. And so people wrote things to me, and I basically realized that we didn't have enough for a book. So I sat down and wrote my own autobiography. I kind of enjoy writing, actually, and put these into the chapters that what each person sent, this was Galina's contribution. So today I thought we would continue with this thing, looking into people. All I did was try and edit these for English. I didn't even do that rigorously. I just tried to correct the obvious things. So this is what Galina said in. So he's talking about using this in comments or questions.
Did she send it recently?
No, she sent this after the 2019 meeting about.
Okay.
Okay,
great.
Probably in February, March of 2020.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So we've already been through the Chinese. This was all from people who came to the birthday party and workshop. So I was quite honored that people would travel this distance to come do this, but they did. So this is what Galina sent me. Her organization is called Erflog. In Russian, that means success or happiness or something, Larissa. What's Erflog translate to?
There is no such a word, Airflog,
Okay.
in
Okay.
Russian. It's
Okay.
maybe abbreviation of some
Yeah, okay.
sort.
Anyway, that's the name for a company. And it's like most of these things, it's kind of a 4 or 5 person little thing. So this is what she sent in. She used the TDA with an energy corporation. Which one I think it was probably the Siberian Power Company. I know she worked with them. And they ran a TDA and got 68%. So because this is a bottom quintile score, she followed the process as she should and worked on the 7 deadly sins. This is really important stuff. I love the way this works, that you get a technical result. It's in the bottom quintile. In that condition, you find these common things. I've talked about this quite a bit. A flawed organization structure. That was the core problem they had to fix. And they did so. And then they retested and did much better. Did a workshop, a 2-hour team meetings. They moved from bottom quintile about 9 months to go to 79%, and did regular TDAs and 4D processes ever since. Ahas galore. So it's a textbook case of how this works. You start by taking data. Jack Welch, a person I don't have much use for, but had an expression: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think that's probably right. Looked at the 7 deadly sins, reorganized, kept the repetition up, and moved up into good territory. So that's a very typical business story of people that use the work. Comments or thoughts or questions?
I do have maybe a comment on all of this. So, and it's for both you and Larissa. Then I hear about all of this, and then we all listen to news. So I don't want to go into particulars of the politics. But does any of this gets used with politicians?
No.
So that they can actually understand and talk to each other?
No,
and we don't have a war, right? Like before a war starts, is there any hope that this can work at that level?
Okay, when you said politicians, my mind went to like U.S. domestic politics.
No.
Okay. Oh,
I'm thinking politics in general.
If they did, we wouldn't have wars, would we?
Right. That's what I'm trying to think.
Aren't wars basically communications breakdowns?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I think the most interesting thing about wars is that I think almost without exception, the people that started them regret it. I think certainly true for World War I. Nobody saw the carnage that come out of that.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just it's our tribalism. It's no different than football or, you know, taking the food from the tribe next door. The short answer is no. If they did this work, we wouldn't have these problems.
Thank you.
Thank you. So she talks about she broke her leg. I remember this. She came to Berlin with a cast on her leg on crutches and needed an operation to they misaligned the bones when they put the cast on. And they did it with, she's talking about this. She'd been seen to mitigate her anxiety before coming unconscious. When she wrote at the end of the surgery, the doctor decided to put the old plaster on her fresh leg. She got after intensive care, excruciating pains, painkillers were useless, and the staff started to find no reason for the pain. So what she figured out was the cast was the wrong shape as her repaired leg was different. She begged them to take some action. They ignored her. I guess this is the Russian medical system. Larissa could comment on that. It took courage and determination on calling for a surgeon on duty. Medical staff were annoyed and just couldn't believe such a simple solution was possible. So what she decided to do was appreciate the surgeons. So when the surgeon finally came, she used authentic appreciation. Her colleague performed an extremely complicated surgery joining bone fragments. I admired their professional qualities and grateful to them. I really appreciate they stayed in the operation longer than usual, even though they had lots of things to do besides me. Their work is due respect, and that's why I ask you to change the plaster, as it may thwart hours-long efforts of unique team of surgeons. Listen, something changed in his face, and that was the aha moment. And immediately he performed all the necessary action, moved the plaster. The pain immediately disappeared, and overall state improved, and the recovery process started. So just a simple story about the power of authentic appreciation. Again, let's go back to whether the politicians that run these countries can meet and find something to appreciate about each other. You think they ever express it? I doubt it. Here's another case. The head of the department came to see me, looked tense and worried. I'd like to thank the team of surgeons and their assistants, express a special appreciation. My words immediately changed the context. I made new friends, genuine care throughout the whole rehabilitation process. At the time of second operation, when they were moving the titanium structure in the room to the sound of music, I was surprised and asked what the reason was. The anesthesiologist answered with a smile. It was especially designed for me, as I was fond of singing. This time I was singing to music. So again, the power of authentic appreciation. Really, comments, thoughts? Understanding innate personality boasts career growth. Following his workshop, the blue manager discovered that the personality foundation of the associate was orange. This was an aha moment. The manager swiftly rearranged RAAs, delegating the work he disliked to him. The manager now focused on strategy for long-term growth. They were both happier and more effective with the new arrangement. The associate was so happy he treated himself to a new business suit. Their glad group emotions and energy flowed into the larger team. The top management noticed this and promoted both of them. So really simple, aligning the work with what people innately like to do. Okay, the power company. They installed a new transformer vault in our apartment building courtyard. It was so noisy, people could hardly open their windows. At night, even closed windows could not stop the buzzing sound, hurting people's mental and physical health. The tenants were complaining nothing could be done. I just have to suffer the situation. Victims. There you go. See, I want you to see this. Nothing complaining, nothing could be done. That's victim state. Everybody got this? So what do you need to do? You need to shift the storyline to a green one. I didn't want to accept the state of affairs, so she took action, made a letter. She moved into the state of responsibility. So she gets this stuff. Contacted my neighbors to collect their signatures. Most refused to sign. That's the victim state. See, there's nothing I can do. It's hopeless. Once it's hopeless, you can't take action. Some were adamant I would not succeed. I was at war with windmills. My actions were a waste of time. After a while, I collected the necessary signatures, handed the letter over to public service. More than a month passed and there was no answer. When meeting me and neighbors asked with a smile, how are things going with my letter? Is there a sure negative result? After waiting a little longer, I called to find a result of my field. Either nobody answered or the line was busy. I did not give up. One evening, a man answered in a rather tired and irritated voice, likely not in the mood for a conversation. I introduced myself and briefly outlined the case. In response, I heard only excuses that due to the large flow of appeals, the issue would resolve sometime in the future. He was ready to hang up. Then I asked him how I should address him. He introduced himself and turned out to be the head of the service. He happened to be near and picked up the phone. Usually all the calls were received by the secretary who had already left. I said, I understand how much work it has to do and how difficult to deal with so many complaints and take responsibility in difficult situations. I'm very grateful that there are people like you who are ready to protect people's right to a safe and fulfilling life. I respect your work and am ready to wait for my letter to be considered. There was a pause. When he spoke to me again, I did not recognize his voice at first. He has changed to become friendly and warm. He said, in the many years of my work, for the first time, I hear words of gratitude and feel respect. I've been working here every day. I've been working for more than 20 years, never listened to accusations and reproaches from all sides, and most of it I get from those who I help in this position. He shared his regrets and needs, kept talking in an open and honest conversation. Listen to him with a sincere understanding of how his activities influence the context in the city and how much personal energy he puts into improving environmental and social aspects of people's lives. At the end of the conversation, he said he assigned a specialist to my request is going to control the whole process. Next day, I got a call and the process of transformer repair started. All is good. Neighbors are surprised and satisfied, and the power of authentic appreciation is revealed again. This is in Novosibirsk, folks. This is not in Boulder. Comments or thoughts?
Yeah,
No.
yeah. That's Bia Nelson's in South Africa. I mean, I'm working with them, as you know, but now I've also got these coaches from different countries in Europe, from like 10 different countries in Europe, and just focusing on this appreciation for their willingness, to become a coach for this youth member in South Africa. I just focus on this appreciation all the time, because you can just imagine you have to communicate in so many cultures, and basically all of them do really have a positive experience. To my surprise, I didn't thought I would come this far with people from all over being involved here.
There it is. That's the key, isn't it?
Yep. For us to
BFK,
try.
successful 25-year-old construction supplies company manufacturing residential windows based in Novosibirsk. They engaged our company, Airflow. Oh, she says it translates as success in English, Larissa, to improve performance in their sales department. Met with their management, been their analysis, a deeper problem emerged in unproductive corporate culture. This culture had a high level of stiffness with competition and conflicts with and between departments and their leaders, most especially the four owners. Poor communications, high tension, and conflicts between the four owners affected the work across the whole company. As windows were a low margin product, low team performance threatened the survival of the enterprise. It was now urgent to improve margins with better management performance and advanced technology. So basically, they're making a commodity. That's why the margins are low. It's easy for competition to enter. It's easy for people to compete against them. It's not a very complicated product. Following 4D protocols, we measured the 22-person management team's social context with the TDA. As expected, the scores were low for all behaviors. The team then chose goals for remeasurements during the 4D development process. That's exactly what we want. We then participated in a workshop. The top management team gathered the workers and collaboratively developed new program goals. Drafted a 4D action plan for the departments. The interaction between top managers changed, tasks are dealt with in a cross-functional field rather than isolation in each department. 80 people participated in a workshop to in place the condition of ideas and language. So I think what the feedback that I used to get after workshops was that the biggest benefit was we have a language to talk about this stuff. There's no common language in the world of social stuff. The sales department implemented a more effective way of interacting with customers based on 4D methods. 4D technology improved the effectiveness of meetings. Drafted a handbook with new rules of interaction within the team. By the way, I did the same thing with the astrophysics division. I think I had a case where I basically removed a guy And I did it the way I've described before. I went and had a talk with him and said he ought to move on to something else, and here's a place he could go. And he would be well advised to move, and I would help him do that. So he went up to my boss and complained about me, which didn't bother me a lot because I know the boss would supported me on this. But what I got out of that was that he had a fair point, that he had not been, he was in the division before me. He did not have a clear statement of what the expectations are. So I wrote a handbook for behavior in the division, a pretty long handbook and a loose leaf folder, and had everybody read that and had how we do things, processes. So I like this idea of a handbook about what's okay to do, what expectations are, et cetera, et cetera. And internal results, communications improved, goals understood, et cetera, et cetera. Although the financial sales are regional, a 2% increase in sales, that's probably pretty significant. They made a previously impossible breakthrough, enable 160 million ruble contract, the largest in their history. The average contract between 20 and 40 rubles. So now she goes with any thoughts about this? I mean, how about your organizations? Do you have any sort of handbook about what expectations are, how you do things?
No.
I think that's
yeah, that's kind of where I'm struggling, is like, how do you get people to want to buy in, right? You can't have somebody, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And that's kind of where I feel like I'm struggling, is you want to make a change, well, then you have to try something different.
I mean, in my experience, it is work. It like you need to put energy and effort in that. So it's also, I mean, we have performance discussions with the staff. So typically, if nothing is going on, then at least mid-year, end year, and the beginning of year, right? And very often I met with staff who say that they're at the top of the salary range, and why does it matter? So my analogy is often, well, think about any government anywhere in the world. They employ whoever they want. They spend a lot of money to employ really smart, hardworking people, yet still they devote a lot of resources in doing annual plan. Budget is nothing but an annual plan. So every year they do that. And like the thing is, if you, in my mind, if you don't invest in planning and then you don't follow through, of course, well, where you are going, right? Like, what's the path? So yeah, all the good governance stuff, you have to have a strategic plan. I also heard from a lot of really successful people that they say that they have their own plan. Like they sit down, they make a point of writing down their own plan. Say, okay, I want to, at this stage, at this point, these are my goals. This is where I would like to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
ultimately for me, my hope is to finally get my team on solid ground, and insulate us from some of the other stuff, and then we can consider starting to hold people accountable. It's just really hard right now. Because a lot of the same bad behaviors keep creeping up. So trying to put eliminate any victim or blamer stories, and try to put the power in my team's hands, so at least we can be successful.
Yeah, same for me. In nonprofit, luckily, we have bylaws to follow. So it's really, and we have a bylaw committees, they are responsible for reviewing it every year. So we change it as we go, because if circumstances change, if we hire new people, things of that nature, we need to really proceed accordingly. But what really, being 100% green, I am trying to orange up a little bit.
That's
At the same time, I realize my constant struggle throughout my nonprofit management experience is really finding a way, not being a victim with managing a blue with a very bad personality. So I'm constantly looking for new approaches, new methods. I appreciate his, without naming names, great ideas, and I appreciate the blue sort of benefits of being blue in him. But boy, oh boy, with a bad personality and questionable sometimes behavior, I have a huge problem with that. But again, I keep him on the team, and encourage others to really get along, because I really, his ideas and his, the core of the blue is really a good contribution. But again, that personality, strange behavior sometimes gets me into the victim stage.
On your feet? So my division was housed in a larger organization called Office of Space Science. And we'd had a political hack run the place for several years, and it was a chaotic disaster. And they replaced him with a really probably the best manager I've ever worked for, a guy named Lynn Fisk, who was also a scientist that I had worked with back when I was doing research at Goddard. And he came in and wrote a strategic plan, but most strategic plans are I love me documents for the management. They're full of pictures of people and platitudes and bullcrap. What he realized was that we needed orange. And so he wrote a set. The plan was like 10 pages, nobody's photographs in it. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't put together by a contractor for gloss. But the most important thing he did is he put in there 10 or so decision rules, how we make decisions. And it was just common sense stuff, but it hadn't been done. It was things like we finish what we start. I thought that was a really smart rule. When he left, it became popular to cancel things, made you look like you're a manly person if you cancel something. And that never made sense to me. If you're a manager and cancel something because you shouldn't ever have started it, you should fire the manager and keep going. Anyway, had these decision rules in there. So you might think about this. What would be, behavioral rules, Larissa, for your outfit? You might get everybody together and say, this is how we're going to behave towards each other. And everybody agrees. By the way, when I say agrees, it means people got to really agree. I had a case where a manager, after he came back from the workshop, pronounced that 2 minutes after a meeting's supposed to start, they're going to lock the door. And that's an agreement. And I said, no, it's not an agreement. Did you get everybody to agree to this? I said, no, I didn't ask them. I just told them, well, the first thing you didn't understand is nature of agreements. And he said, yeah, he sort of mumbled, and I said, but that's not the problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, the problem is the next week I arrived 3 minutes earlier and the door was locked. So if you make the rules, you better comply with them and get agreement. And people, I think, will usually agree when it's not personal, and then you can use this to say, Larissa, this is a behavior we've agreed is not okay. Would you please modify? And I think the basic structure of how you're going to decide things, if you can't document that, I'm not sure you know what you're doing. So anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And all the company's sales were seasonal, this increase. Yeah, I went through this. And she's grateful to me now, which is nice. So that's the Airflog story as she submitted it.
By the way, Charlie, you can simply copy and paste that word into the Google Translate, and Google Translate will prove my point. There is no Russian word for it.
Okay, well, maybe it's
It's a abbreviation of some sort.
A Galina word. I have Charlie words, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I have words that I use that aren't real words. And here's what Frank didn't come to the party because he doesn't travel much, but he did send this in. So here's what, by the way, any more thoughts about Galina and what she talked about? Pretty straightforward story.
No, thank you for sharing.
Nico, Nat, Darinka, good, okay.
All good.
So here's what Frank sent in. Frank did well over 100 workshops for 4D systems. So what happened was, as this stuff started to expand, I realized that I don't like traveling to Huntsville, Alabama much. I remember one time I'm in a hotel and I said, where can we buy a bottle of wine? And it looked like me like I'm asking where we could get heroin. And someone said, I recommend this restaurant. And we went there for dinner and they had Coke. We like to have wine with dinner. So and plus they're really into college football, which I couldn't care less about. And their human flight system. So we agreed Frank would do the southern states, which is Kennedy, Johnson, and Marshall, and I would do Goddard and Glenn and JPL. So about a third of them in Huntsville. I'd often ask senior leaders who've been there in 3, 4, sometimes more of these events as members of the team why they kept coming back, especially since they knew enough to lead the workshop themselves. I received similar responses, almost to a person. They said they got something new each time because they came with different perspectives and expectations. The teams had different members. The common language story. So I think you guys have had experience of looking at the material now 2 or 3 times and seeing something different in it. So I had in the early days, the first 5 or 6 years of this, I got the idea to have senior managers come in and talk at lunch. At that time, we did these offsite in hotels, and the hotels, NASA would pay for catered lunches if it's a working lunch. So I'd just, I would ask the managers to come out and talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. And so lunchtime would have an hour where you could probably go through a buffet and eat in about 10, 15 minutes and then sit down and listen to somebody talk. And this was always interesting. So here he's going to talk about that, I guess. Phil used to have both the center director and deputy center director come in and talk to the team on different days. Both had been in several workshops. So it's never surprising to find users of 4D systems and NASA leadership positions. Acting Administrator Robert Lightfoot came from Marshall Space Flight Center where he was in 4D workshops. So this is one of my favorite stories about Frank. I think I asked him to put this in here. He was at, it's usual for technical teams to have one or more blue personalities who resist participating in the exercises. You might relate this story to motivate them, as I've used it for preventing 4D workshops from time to time. I have a PhD in physics and preferred technical classes when I was an undergraduate. I agree. Nevertheless, as a small liberal arts college where I had to take liberal arts courses to graduate, which me too. I was at a technical university, but the physics department required more liberal arts than the engineers, and I think it was useful. My senior year, I took a course in art history, thinking it would be totally about the history of art. When I arrived for my first class, I found charcoal and paper on my desk. I'd wanted to read about art, not draw it. Originally, I worked with the charcoals, hoping this was not going to happen every class. When I arrived at the second class, I found pastels on my desk. I decided enough was enough and sat at my desk reading the textbook. The professor was walking around the class, noticed I was just sitting. He said, "Mr. Martin, you've not done anything. Is there a problem?" I responded, "I signed up for an art history class, and I'm not very good at drawing and coloring and just don't feel like doing this." The young first-year professor, not much older than me, leaned down and spoke quietly in my ear so no one else would hear. What he had to say was just for me. His word turned out to be a big gift. "Mr. Martin, cut the bullshit and pick up the chalk." I picked up, sat straight, and began to draw. Many years later, I gave the commencement address at the college. The luncheon for commencement speakers and other dignitaries was set up in the art building. I thanked the professor, who was now the head of the art department, for the gift, telling him that ever after I picked up the chalk. I also noticed the professor looked at appreciated the beautiful art created in his class. The professor looked at my records from the class and enjoyed that I made an A-A. That was my only A in liberal arts class.
Yeah, sometimes this strategy, cut the BS, it really helps. Yes, absolutely.
Cut the BS and pick up the chalk.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I can just see the picture of this. I can really envision it.
So that's just to show you what's in this document. If you want it, I'll email it to you. But this is kind of, I turn this into an autobiography and starts off talking about my sort of journey through life and cars and first marriage and physics research and the great observatories, a lot of stuff about my work at NASA. Then how I met Junko, how the contract came. My daughter's boyfriend runs a simulator for 767-400 in Denver, and I went and shot ILS landings during the COVID pandemic because it wasn't used fully. The birthday party, the fire. And here's some things that are just things that that I wrote, I find interesting. Things that I wrote, maybe you should look at my 4D findings. Let me see what I put here. Anyway, so these are just things about just topics that I find interesting. The idea of the positive feedback loops, the idea that we need to how the social context field works, measuring the fields. This is all stuff you're familiar with. The AMBR process that you all know all about. An interesting story. I worked closely with Ball Aerospace when I was at NASA as they built all the Hubble instruments and they came up with the fix. Had a especially close relationship with the VP of Civil Space, Ed Vandernoord. During the Hubble thing, he came to Washington once a week, which I consider a nuisance trip, and took me out to lunch. And we went to a local restaurant kind of down by the waterfront, had a pleasant, nice lunch. And I said, "What's this about?" He said, "I've been worried about your mental health with all the stress you're under. So I thought if I came and took you out to lunch once a week." So I enjoyed the guy. So after I left CU, he contracted for workshops for 4D work. And later on, the head of the company became enamored with this book, Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's a very popular book, sold millions of copies. Jim Collins also lives here in Boulder. I've chatted with him on the phone, but I don't like the book much. It's he never took a course in statistics. I don't think so. It's basically anecdotes, and what I watched happen here was that the CEO gave all the top management a copy of this book, and it had like 10 chapters and 10 things you're supposed to do. It's the same as all these books. There's anecdotes about somebody. One of his little anecdotes is what a great company Boeing is. Well, look how that turned out. Anyway, so one of his rules was that you always should hire senior people from within. And the arguments were well reasoned. He said, if you give insiders the hope of getting to these top management jobs, in at least the aerospace industry, the salary gradient is enormous as you go up toward the top. Like the CEO probably makes millions of dollars. The next level probably makes 500 grand a year. Trickle on down. The gradient is huge. In the government, it's not so. In the government, at least in U.S. government, the top management might make 5% more than the next level, or maybe 5% more than the next level. But in industry, it's a very big deal. So this was a primary recommendation of the book: always promote from within. So I watched what they did after they all got copies of the book, and they did what they always did. They hired from outside. So I thought, you didn't even implement a primary recommendation in this book. Therefore, it just reinforced what I already knew. Business books are entertaining, but near useless for the only thing that matters, which is behavioral improvement. Comments, thoughts? Don't waste.
I've read that book.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. I think a lot of businesses don't do some of the basics, and I think while Boeing was a great company, they got away from some of those basics, and they let the wrong people behind the wheel of the management.
Yeah, I read the book too.
You read it too?
Yeah, and I had friends, engineers, obviously from Boeing as well. So anyway, just can't really stop thanking you, Charlie, for sharing your wisdom, and it really made a big difference. Yeah, thank you.
Question is, can you both recommend the book, Nat and
No,
Lisa?
I don't recommend the book. I think it's statistically flawed.
It's an interesting read, but I think, as Charlie noted, it's kind of anecdotal, and a lot of feel-good stories. I think you can get there with common sense as well. But the other core is it doesn't really show the consequences or change behavior.
I agree. Yeah. But what really interests me that we all really we were following sort of the similar flow in our work. Just really validates the point that we are the member of the same team, so to speak. So we just independently came across this type of books, and we had similar reaction to it. So just validates the point that we might as well just form a company. The all of us who really takes your class, Charlie. It would be a fantastic to really see how it will work out. Thank you.
Good idea. Okay, so this is about a question that I think is interesting to me, at least, and that is, what is the relationship between these scores and actual performance? Is it highly correlated or not at all? So this is how I approach the problem. I think that it's intuitively obvious. If you had a team, I'd like to look at limits. This is kind of a physics thing, limit arguments. Imagine a team that scored every behaviors never meets. I submit they could do little or nothing as a team. So let's just think of it. So there's no appreciation, no inclusion, no reality, and full of drama. I think if they scored at the bottom, they could do nothing. And I think a team that scored every behavior is 100%, where they had appreciation, inclusion, to put it simply, addressed unfortunate realities with 100% commitment, and responded appropriately to what's happening, that would be an optimal performance, and I would give them a score of 100%. So I think that argument to me makes sense. Comments or thoughts that make sense to you? So the question now is, what's the shape of the line connecting the 2 points? I think actually it's probably an S curve. I think my intuition, and Frank believes this too, that the thing is actually more exaggerated than a straight line, but I have no evidence to prove that other than sort of suspecting that. So you go to Occam's razor, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's simply a rule that says the simplest solution is the most likely. So I suggest a straight line connecting the two. So that's my argument about the importance of the scoring relative to team performance and why you should do it.
What would the S curve in your mind look like? Does it mean like teams kind of grow slowly and then they see?
I think the S curve would be kind of like, well, you can't see me, but it would say the effect is actually stronger than linear. By the way, S curves in a lot of things, adoption.
Right.
It's but I'm not arguing for the S curve. I'm just saying that's my.
Yeah. Right.
I'm arguing for the straight line. That's the simplest solution. And
Yeah.
my only point is that I think it may be more exaggerated than a straight line, but a straight line would be where I'd land on this question. It's about bottom quintile teams. So this is interesting. When we first looked at bottom quintile teams, and I realized quickly they were too dysfunctional to learn, with red storylines, etc., and they're just a nightmare in a workshop, unpleasant throughout. And in contrast, the top quintile teams, Frank and I and others, Frank and I probably would have an argument about who gets to do those. They're fun. The top quintile teams are delightful to be with. They sort of already get it, and they actually get more out of the workshops. So I began to wonder about what's going on here. And my first thought was I'd read that if you have a social event in a mental hospital, like a dance, the most dysfunctional people will find each other and link up. So what I was thinking was it was you start with a core of a few dysfunctional people, and they attract dysfunctional people. That was my hypothesis. But I had data to check this, and that is at the time, all the NASA workshops had IDAs for each person before they came to the workshop. So I had data about the dysfunctionality of an individual, and I plotted those data and compared that to TDA scores, thinking I would find high correlation. That was my hypothesis. That was completely wrong. The correlation coefficient R was less than 0.3. That's very low correlation. So the idea that this was operating like the mental hospital example did not pan out. So question is, what's going on here? So that's when I brought my 8 center program managers together who'd worked with hundreds of teams, and we discussed what we were seeing in bottom quintile teams, and we came up with the 7 deadly sins. So the first one was inadequate team leadership, followed by grossly impossible funds, and third was impossible technology. So this made sense to me. So I began to play with this and see if it would work. So I asked the managers, are you the problem? And I referring to the first item in the list, and I was quite surprised that they would say maybe surprisingly frequently. Why would they would never talk to me this way when I was a NASA manager. But once I'm an outside consultant, there's nothing to be afraid of with me. I have no power to do anything. And so what we would do is we'd run an IDA to see. And if the IDA showed it, then we'd move them into a different job. Insufficient funds was the problem. I teach them how to make a 4D request. And if the technology was impossible, I'd suggest they stop and go work on something that's doable. So anyway, that's little anecdotes here. That's how the 7 deadly sins came up. You make a hypothesis, you check it with data. If you're wrong, you look some more and come up with one that works. This might interest you. This is early on, I had 12 behaviors. And I was reading a story in the book Blink. And Malcolm Gladwell talked about the director of Cook County Hospital. Cook County Hospital is a hospital in Chicago that deals with mostly, I think, low-income people. And the problem they've got is there's not enough beds. So the doctors work under a lot of stress, because if someone comes in there with looks like symptoms of a heart attack and you put them in a bed and they're not having one, someone else that could have used that bed is not going to get it and going to die. Conversely, if someone comes in there and you diagnose them not having a heart attack and tell them there's no bed, then they die. So he began to wonder about how to make the diagnosis more accurate. And he actually took a whole bunch of hospital records and data, and he gave them to theoretical physicists and said, go find me the correlation factors within these various diagnostics, because the medical records would say what the physician was seeing in the patients. They came back and said it only correlates with 4 things. And so that was interesting to me. And I went to see for an annual physical. And on the back side of the door, there was a poster that the doctor had put up there that had these 4 factors. So what I got was that if you can reduce what you're measuring and changing to the smallest, most effective numbers, it's actually going to be more effective. So I reduced the behaviors from 12 to 8, believing more emphasis on a smaller number would give you a better result. And I worked with the coaches, talked with them, and that's how we got to the current 8 behaviors. I took the 12 that were there before. I said, let's look at the 2. I believe you need 2 per dimension, just kind of like redundancy. And so that's how this happened about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years into, and actually after we're doing the NASA work, this happened. Until then I had 12 behaviors and changed it to 8. That's how that happened. Comments, thoughts?
So were there 3 per quadrant previously?
Yeah, exactly. There were, when you took the course, if I was doing this work, there would have been 3 per quadrant, 3 per dimension.
Yeah.
So you could argue down to 4, but I thought that it's better to have 2 per dimension. And the 8 that we wound up with, I'd have a really hard time throwing one of those babies out of the boat into the water.
Yeah.
So was this a good session today?
Yes, it was a
It
good
was.
session. Thank you.
Yeah,
It was.
thank you, Charlie. It's amazing.
Thank you for coming. So
Yeah, if I can have a word with you, Charlie, afterwards, after the session.
certainly, I'll stay on. You get 2 free minutes back, everybody.
Awesome. Looking forward to next week.
Thank you.
Yep.
See
Thank
next
you.
week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good
Bye.
week.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.